But we're also learning more about the horrific shooting that claimed the lives of two Catholic children at a Catholic school in Minneapolis this week, and the brave middle schoolers who helped shield younger students from the gunfire.
Chanley Painter joins us now with the latest. Good morning, Chanley.
Hey, good morning. So a school buddy system is being credited as helping prevent a significantly worse tragedy Wednesday after a parent tells NPR that older students were paired with younger ones during the annual back-to-school mass so the lower grades could learn how to behave in church. That parent, though, saying this, quote, "The first action by those middle schoolers was to push their buddies down under the pew, which is why the middle schoolers were the ones who were standing the longest and were largely the injured, acting in heroism, and then covering the little ones under the pews." And this comes as we are learning more information about the shooter who killed 2 students and wounded 18 others, including 15 school children between the ages of 6 and 15. According to a search warrant, the 23-year-old had recently gone through a breakup. Quote, Robin Westman broke up with a significant and/or romantic partner from that premise recently and has recently been staying with a friend. Police learning this after interviewing the shooter's father, who told police his child once attended the Annunciation Catholic School and church and that his ex-wife once worked there. As far as the shooter's mother, police now say Mary Grace Westman is working with them in the investigation after initially refusing to cooperate.
Through working with our partners with the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension of Minnesota, there has been conversation, and I am not at liberty to go any further than that.
Westman has also hired a lawyer who told Fox she is completely distraught and about the situation and has no culpability in this. Guys.
Thank you, Chanley.
Thanks, Chanley.
You guys, I had no idea when Chanley came on what aspect of this story she was going to cover, and I'm so glad she covered this one. When the shooting took place, I was literally minutes from coming on to air on Outnumbered, and as the information is trickled out on what happened and how, as she described, the older kids were shielding the younger kids, before I heard this report, I knew that was happening because Catholic schools are like families. And one of the things that Catholic schools do is they often put, like, the older kids will come and do reading with the younger kids and with younger grades. And they are buddied up, older kids with younger kids, to help them behave, or so they can model how to act and have that sibling-like relationship with the other younger children. So it is no surprise to me that these children, these older middle school kids, basically threw their own bodies on top of these kids, pushed them onto the ground and under the pews so that they could rescue them. That's just how it is in Catholic schools. And I'll mention this. One of the bishops who came down immediately to pray with these kids said one of the saddest things he saw was, Catholic families, big families, a lot of siblings waiting to see if their sibling was okay inside of that church. Very sad indeed.
Well, meanwhile, one of the most shocking things in the aftermath of this was to actually listen to Democrats and some in the media denounce those of us whose first reaction was to pray for these people.
We have seen this play out over and over again. There is a shooting, then come the thoughts and prayers, and then comes the attempt to shift the focus. This is what always happens. Now, clearly, our nation's gun laws are not enough. But that means that if politicians actually want to do something to stop these shootings, there is a lot left for them to do. But thoughts and prayers alone are not going to cut it.
And don't just say this is about thoughts and prayers right now. These kids were literally praying. It was the first week of school. They were in a church.
I think that there are a lot of people who were tired of thoughts and prayers because at the end of the day, thoughts and prayers ring hollow. At the end of the day, thoughts and prayers have led us to having more of these deaths.
The thoughts and prayers, I'm so beyond that nonsense, the lie of that. Because what we have are people who continue to stand in the way of actually doing something.
So this is like a level of ghoulishness that it's kind of even hard. You don't even like to engage with people like this that say things like this. But one thing that I think is particularly interesting, especially from people who worked in the Obama administration, Barack Obama was president and had a filibuster-proof majority at one point during his presidency. if this is what causes, if gun laws, the lack of gun laws is what causes school shootings, he could have actually gotten something done to prevent all that from happening. And he didn't do that. And either because he doesn't care about these people and the people in the Obama administration don't care about it, or they care more about the fact that they would have been punished politically for it. I suspect it was more about the second thing, that they cared more about their political future than they did about doing the things they now say would solve these things.
You know, you say they're ghoulish. Maybe. I think they're just really ignorant. A lot of these people are progressives. They're secularists. They worship at the altar of, you know, social justice, and they think social justice is the answer to all of our problems. And often it's just the cross. And Bishop Barron actually had a really great response to this. Listen. He said, Catholics don't think that prayer magically protects them from all suffering. Prayer is the raising of the mind and heart to God, which strikes me as altogether appropriately, precisely at times of great pain. And prayer by no means stands in contrast to decisive moral action. This is not an either-or proposition. I would say to you, Joey, that Jesus Christ was dying on the cross and prayed.
No, absolutely. And Bishop Barron is going to join us next hour, so stay tuned. It'll be a very interesting conversation. There's a lot to unpack here. Two different things. Charlie, you kind of focused on the gun laws and where Democrats are. Obviously, Rachel, you see where they're, I guess, attacking prayer. And if that's your reaction to such a tragedy, is to utilize dead kids for your political and partisan gain, and then not even do it overtly, but innately, it's a part of your nature, it's a part of what you believe in, to attack prayer, you're probably, there's a reason why the people saying these things are also on the losing side of pretty much every issue in America right now, because that's the way they think. You know, I understand what you're saying. Maybe they're a little bit ignorant to this. They're not a little bit ignorant to this. The stats and figures are there. They care about these school shootings because they look at that like political leverage they can reach into a bucket and pick up with both hands and run with. It has nothing to do with saving kids. It has nothing to do with making our country safer. These exact same politicians are trying to attack President Trump right now because Washington, D.C. doesn't have enough kids dying right now because of what President Trump is doing. If you look in Minneapolis or Chicago or New York City or any big metropolis, and regardless of who's in charge, although most of those are Democrats, policies don't work that they're using. It's illegal guns that are killing people. It's handguns that have been absolutely, the Supreme Court has said, hey, you can't take those away. So they're going after the one gun that the Supreme Court hasn't ruled that harshly on or that decisively on, but it has nothing to do with saving lives. So if they're ignorant, they're also disingenuous and full of crap.
All right.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.